The cowboy lit one candle for Christmas alone. A widow with 3 girls knocked at midnight. I had one candle left. That's the thing I remember clearest, not the cold, not the wind working at the window frame, not the particular quiet that Christmas Eve gets when you're alone in it. I remember standing at the kitchen table looking at that one stub of tallow candle like it was the last serious thing in the world, deciding whether to light it or save it. Save it for what? I couldn't have told you. I was 61 years old and I had no one left to save anything for. I lit it. The flame went up and the room got a little warmer looking, even if it wasn't. Yellow on the pine wall, yellow on the old tin cup I'd been drinking from, yellow on the 2-day beard I hadn't thought to shave. Outside it was 20 degrees and dropping, and the snow that had started around noon was still coming. Not hard, just steady. The way the worst snows do it, patient meaning it. I sat down with what was left of my coffee, which wasn't much and wasn't warm, and I looked at that candle flame and I thought, this is Christmas. This is the whole of it. It wasn't self-pity. I want to be clear about that. Self-pity is when you think you deserve better. I'd made the choices I'd made, buried who I'd buried, and the life I was living. The 30 acres outside Garnett, Montana, the 2 horses in the barn, the winter food put up in the cellar, the quiet that had taken over every room, that was the consequence of all of it, fair and square. I wasn't sad exactly. I was just done. The kind of done where you still get up in the morning and feed the animals and fix what needs fixing. But the thing underneath all that, the thing that made it matter, that had gone out some years back, and I'd stopped expecting it to relight. I had a Bible on the table I hadn't opened, a deck of cards I hadn't touched. There was no tree because I hadn't cut one, hadn't seen the point. I'd put nothing on the walls and nothing in the window. I was 61 years old and I'd been the law in 2 counties before my knee gave out in a way that never properly healed. And before that I'd done things with my hands. I was glad nobody could read on my face anymore. And the woman I'd thought would sit across from me at tables like this one had been in the ground in Billings for 11 years. Her name was Clara. She died in April, which is a cruel month for a thing like that, when everything else is deciding to come back. I don't think about her every day anymore. That part is true, but Christmas Eve I always do. You can't help it. The dark comes early and the wind has that sound and your hands are empty and you think, she would have had a tree up. She would have had something on the stove. She would have been laughing at some small thing I'd said or pretending to laugh, which was somehow better. She'd have been humming while she cooked, that half-aware hum she did that was never quite a recognizable song, just whatever was moving through her at the moment. The kitchen would have smelled like something. Not just wood smoke and the ghost of old meals, but something deliberate made. I thought about her for a while, let myself. Then I stopped and just sat. The candle burned. The wind pushed at the window. Somewhere in the barn, one of the horses shifted and I heard the wood creak. There's a particular kind of evening that gets long in a way that has nothing to do with the clock. Christmas Eve alone is one of those. The hours sit differently. You finish a thought and reach for the next one and there's nothing there. Just the fire and the dark outside and the occasional sound of the ranch settling into the cold. I'd had 11 of those evenings and I knew the shape of them. You get through them the way you get through a bad river crossing. You don't look at the water, you look at the far bank. You just keep moving. I was thinking about bed. It was maybe 11, maybe later when I heard it. 3 knocks. Hard, not tentative. The kind of knocks a person throws who's been cold long enough that courtesy has gone out of them. I sat still for a second, which is an old habit from when being the law meant that a knock at night was not always a good thing. Then I heard something else under it. A sound I couldn't quite name, thin and high. The sound a small child makes when it's past crying and into something more exhausted than that, and I got up. I picked up the candle and the .44 that lived on the shelf by the door, and I opened it. The snow came in before I saw her properly. She was standing on the step with a child on her hip, a small one, young enough still to be carried, and behind her in the dark I could make out two more girls standing close together with their arms wrapped around each other. The woman's coat was a man's coat, too big for her, the collar turned up against the side of her face. Her hair was dark and had come loose from whatever had been holding it, and the snow was sitting in it. She looked at me and at the gun and then back at my face, and she didn't flinch. That was the first thing I noticed about her, that she didn't flinch. "I saw your light," she said. Her voice was steady. People in real trouble, sometimes their voice goes steady. It's when the shaking stops that you worry. "My wagon went into the ditch about a mile up the road. I've got my girls. I just need somewhere to put them until morning." I looked past her at the two standing in the snow. One of them was maybe 8, 9, the other smaller, maybe 6. The little one on her hip had its face pressed into her shoulder and wasn't moving. I looked back at the woman. Her boots were wrong for this weather, low-heeled, thin leather, already dark from the wet. She'd walked a mile in those. A mile in the dark in a snowstorm with that child on her hip and two more girls to manage. I looked at her face again. She met it straight on. I said, "Come in." I said it before I thought about it, which is, I think, the only honest way a thing like that happens. You don't decide. Your body decides and your mouth follows. She came in. The two girls came in behind her without a word. I shut the door and the wind stopped, and the room that had felt so empty an hour ago was suddenly full of the sound of small people breathing and stamping snow off their feet, and the particular smell of cold humans come in from the cold, wool and wood smoke, and something underneath, pine maybe, or just the smell of the night itself clinging to them. It was such a specific and human smell that it hit me somewhere I wasn't expecting. The woman looked around the room. She took it in the way a person does when they're cataloging what's here, what's safe, what do I have to work with. She looked at the fireplace with its low coals, at the table with the candle, at the two doors to the bedroom and the back room. She looked at the single cup, the single plate, the unworn space of the house. She took all of it in, and then she looked at me. "I'm not asking for anything but a floor," she said. "My girls are cold, and the little one hasn't been right since this afternoon. I'll be out of your way before first light." "My name is Gideon Marsh," I said, "and you'll stay until it's fit to travel. That floor's cold. There's a bedroom through there." She looked at me a moment longer, deciding something. Then she said, "Ruth Calloway, and these are my daughters." She turned slightly. "The big one's me, the other's Dora. And this one," she adjusted the small child on her hip, and the child stirred and turned her face, and I saw she was pale in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. "This is Lily." Lily looked at me with eyes that were too large for what was underneath them, and then put her face back in her mother's shoulder. "How old?" I said. 4. "How long has she been feverish?" Ruth Calloway looked at me and something shifted in her face, not surprise exactly. More like she was revising something about me, updating a category. "Since noon." "You were driving in a snowstorm with a sick child." "I was trying to reach Garnet before dark. I misjudged the road." I didn't say anything to that. I knew that stretch of road, one bend where the ditch came in at a surprise if the snow was covering the shoulder. It had gotten more than one wagon over the years. A man in a hurry, or in the dark, or in the snow could hit that bend wrong without half trying. I said, "There's a bedroom with a proper bed. Take the girls in there. I'll get the fire built up." I looked at the two older girls. Me was watching me with the careful watchfulness of a child who has had to watch carefully for a while. Dora was looking at the candle with the specific absorption of a child who is either easily distracted or who processes the world differently from other people. I'd learn over the next few days that it was the second thing. "There's cornbread in the back room on the shelf," I said, to nobody in particular, "and dried apples." Me looked at her mother. Her mother nodded one small move, and me said, "Yes, sir," and went to find the back room. She found it without asking where it was, which told me something about her. I went to the fireplace and started getting the fire up properly. Behind me, I could hear Ruth Calloway settling the girls, the small sounds of a mother working, the murmur of her voice too low to make out, the creak of the bed frame, Lily making a thin, faint sound that was not quite crying and not quite anything else. I put on 2 good pieces from the stack by the hearth and then went to the woodpile on the porch and brought in 3 more. The fire began to mean something. It began to push back against the corners. When I turned back around, Ruth was in the doorway of the bedroom watching me. She'd taken the heavy coat off and hung it somewhere. Underneath, she was wearing a dark dress, practical, the kind a woman wears when she's working. She was somewhere around 40, maybe a year or 2 either side. Her face was the kind that doesn't advertise what it costs to keep that expression level. Not pretty in a soft way, handsome in a harder way. The way a thing is handsome when it's well made and has been used for its purpose. "Me and Dora are eating," she said. "Lily's asleep or close. She need a doctor. She needs sleep and warmth. She gets fevers. She's always gotten fevers." She said it plainly, the way a mother says a thing she said 100 times to herself in the dark, to doctors, to anyone who will tell her whether to worry. She comes out of them. All right. I went to the stove and found the pot that still had some of the afternoon's broth. I'd made it from a marrow bone and some dried herbs and hadn't eaten more than half of it, and I put it on to warm. There's broth. Not much, but it's there. She watched me do this. Then she said, "You were the law." I looked up. "The way you looked at me when you opened the door," she said. "You were deciding whether I was a threat. That's not how most men look at a woman on their step." "Used to be," I said. "Sheriff over in Cutter County, a while back." She nodded like that confirmed something. "You live out here alone?" It wasn't a question. I said yes anyway. She looked at the room again, the single cup, the single plate drying by the basin, the unworn space of the house, the nothing on the walls, the Bible on the table with its unbroke spine. She took all of it in, and I got the feeling she understood most of what it added up to. She didn't say anything else about it. Me came to the doorway with a piece of cornbread in her hand and looked up at me with those careful eyes. "Mr. Marsh," she said, "there's something wrong with your back window." "Latch is loose," I said. "Wind gets to it." "I'll fix it in the spring." She considered this with the gravity of a small person used to considering practical information. Then she went back in. I poured broth into a smaller cup, a tin cup, not much but hot, and handed it to Ruth Calloway. She took it with both hands around it and just held it for a moment with her eyes closed. Not praying, I didn't think. Just existing inside the warmth of it, letting it move up through her palms and into her arms. Then she opened her eyes and she drank. I sat back down at the table. I didn't know where else to put myself. My own house, and I didn't know where to be in it. After a while she came and sat across from me. She didn't ask. She just pulled the chair out and sat in it the way a person does when they're past the formality of asking, which I appreciated more than I would have expected. "Your husband," I said it carefully. 3 years, she said. "Fever. Not the same fever Lily gets, a different kind." She looked at the candle between us. "He was a good man. Not everyone is, and he was. He worked hard and he was kind to the girls, and when he got sick he didn't complain about it, which was the thing about him that—" She stopped, looked at the candle. "That was the thing about him." I nodded. "We were going to my sister in Garnet," she said. "She has a house there. It's been a hard year and she stopped, started again, quieter. The farm didn't come through like I needed it to. I had to make a decision, and I made it. Selling. Sold." She looked at her hands around the cup. 2 weeks ago. I kept what we could fit in the wagon and I settled what I owed and we left." She said this with the completeness of someone who has not allowed themselves to say it out loud before, and who is now saying it out loud so that it will be real and done and not sitting unexamined. "My girls don't know everything it cost. I'd like to keep it that way as long as I can." So she had nothing behind her and was going toward what she could still reach, driving in the snow on Christmas Eve with a sick child and 2 other girls, and whatever would fit in a wagon that was now sitting in a ditch a mile up my road. I thought about what that took. I thought about the quality of a person who keeps her voice level at midnight on a stranger's step, who walks a mile in the wrong boots carrying a sick child, who takes stock of a room before she asks for anything, and then asks for the minimum. I've known hard people, spent most of my working life around them. Some of them were hard because they were mean, and some of them were hard because they'd been made that way by things they hadn't chosen, and some of them, the rarest kind, were hard the way good iron is hard. It would rather break than bend, and it almost never does either one. You could test it all you wanted, and the best it would do was take the shape of what pressed it, and even then, when the pressure came off, it would go back. Ruth Calloway was the third kind. I could see it in the way she held herself even exhausted, even at midnight on a stranger's chair. Straight, not proud. There's a difference. Proud is when you're aware of it. She wasn't aware of it. It was just how she was shaped. I said, "My barn is sound. Your horses." "One horse," she said. "He was still standing when I left the wagon. I tied him to the trace. I'll go get him in the morning." She looked up at me. "You don't have to." "I know," I said. We sat with the candle between us and the fire going behind me, and the wind outside doing what it does, and I thought about the last time there had been someone across that table from me. I couldn't remember it clearly. I'd had a man from town out in October to help with some fence work, and we'd eaten lunch together, but that's a different thing. I mean someone who sat the way she was sitting, like the chair was hers, like the room held her as part of the room. "When did you eat last?" I said. She thought about it honestly. "Noon," she said. "I ate with the girls." "There's more cornbread." She started to say something and stopped. Then she got up and went to the back room, and I heard her finding it. I sat at the table and I thought about the last 11 years in a way I don't usually let myself. Not the grief part. I've thought about that plenty, but the going through the motions part. All the mornings getting up and doing the work, not because I wanted the results, but because the work itself was the only thing that kept me from just stopping. Lying down somewhere and letting it all go, not in a violent way, just in the way a fire goes when you stop feeding it, when the last piece of wood burns down and nothing replaces it, and the coals get orange and then gray, and then not even warm. I'm not a man given to dark thoughts as a rule, but there is a kind of living that is mostly waiting to be finished, and I'd been doing that kind for a while, and I'd made a kind of peace with it. You get to a point where the peace itself is the most honest thing you have. You stop pretending otherwise. You eat breakfast and feed the stock and do the fencing, and you sleep when it gets dark, and you get up when it gets light, and you don't think too hard about what any of it is in service of. I thought about lighting that candle earlier, that one stub of tallow. Save it for what? Ruth Calloway came back with a piece of cornbread and sat back down and ate it without self-consciousness, the way genuinely hungry people eat. No apology in it, no making a show of it in the other direction either, just eating, because she needed it. I watched the candle. One of the logs in the fireplace settled and sent up a brief show of sparks. "You have anyone?" she said after a while. "No," I said. "Had a wife 11 years back." She didn't say she was sorry. I appreciated that. People say they're sorry, and mostly they mean they don't know what else to say, and that's all right. But sometimes it just fills up the air where the real thing should be. Instead, she said, "What was she like?" And I told her. I don't know why. Maybe because it was midnight and the candle was going down, and there was something in the quality of the room, the fire, the sleeping girls, this woman who hadn't flinched, that made the usual reasons to stay quiet seem smaller than usual. Clara had been a schoolteacher before she married me, had the patience for it, and the voice, and the particular way of looking at something broken and seeing what it was supposed to be. She'd never been afraid of the job I did, which surprised a lot of people. Most women would have wanted you to be something else. Clara just understood that some things have to be done by someone, and she was glad I was the someone, and that was the end of it. She didn't treat it as a burden she was carrying, and she didn't make it dramatic. She just accepted it the way you accept weather. It's what it is. Let's figure out how to live in it. She liked music, had a tendency to hum while she was working, a habit she wasn't quite aware of. If you mentioned it, she'd get a funny look like she was surprised to find herself doing it. She could look at a bad situation and find the one true piece of it worth working with. She was funny in a dry way that would sneak up on you. She'd say something so plain you'd miss it, and then it would land a full beat later, and she'd be looking at you with that particular expression, pleased with herself, not showing it much. I missed that. I missed having someone in the same room who could make something plain that I'd been making complicated. Ruth Calloway listened without looking away, not nodding along, not making the small sounds people make to show they're listening, just actually listening, the way it's done when you mean it. When I ran out, she said, she sounded like she was steady. That's the word, I said. The best ones usually are, she said, not comparing, not making anything of it, just saying a thing she knew. And then we were quiet, and it wasn't uncomfortable. The fire popped. The wind ran along the north wall. Somewhere past midnight, I couldn't have said where exactly, I heard Lily make a small sound in the bedroom, and then Ruth was up before I'd even registered it, gone through the door without a sound, and the house went into that particular kind of quiet that means a child being tended. I got up and put another piece of wood on the fire. I stood at the fireplace with my hand on the mantel, and I looked at the room, the extra chairs, the cups on the table, the coat on the hook by the door that wasn't mine, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I didn't have a good name for it. Not happiness, not exactly. More like the floor under me had a little more substance than it had that morning. Like something that had been pretending to be solid had become actually solid, and I could feel the difference only because I'd been walking on the false kind long enough to know how it felt. I went to the window and looked out at the snow. It was still coming, steady, patient. By morning it would be 2 feet at least. The wagon wasn't going anywhere for 2 days, maybe 3. I thought about that. I went back to my chair. When Ruth came back, she looked at me and said, "She's sleeping, real sleep this time." Good. She sat down. She looked at the candle, which was burning low now. "How far is your nearest neighbor?" she said. "Haskell Place, 4 miles. She nodded. She was doing the same arithmetic I'd done. The snow, the road, the distance, the time. "We'll be in your way," she said. "A few days." "You won't," I said, which was true but also not quite all of it, and I think she heard that. She looked at me in the candle light in a way that was direct and not unkind and not anything else yet, just honest, a person taking another person's measure in honest light. Then she looked away. We sat there until the candle burned down to nothing, and the room went to firelight only, warm and irregular, and I got up and said there were blankets in the chest. And she said thank you, and I said good night, and she said good night, and I went to the back room and lay down on the old rope bed I kept there for, well, I'd never really needed it for anything before, and I looked at the ceiling, and I listened to the sounds of a house that was no longer empty. It was strange. I don't mean strange bad. I mean strange the way a feeling you'd forgotten is strange when it comes back, familiar and foreign at the same time. Like finding something in a coat pocket you'd lost and searched for, and then given up on and made a kind of peace with losing. I lay there listening, and I thought, me will want to know about the loose latch. That child catalogs things. In the morning she'll want to understand how the ranch works, and I'll have to decide how much to show her. I thought Dora is the quiet one, the one who watched the candle. Something turns behind those eyes, I don't know what yet. I thought Lily needs broth in the morning if the fever is down and sleep if it isn't. I thought Ruth Calloway has her sister in Garnet, and she will get there in 3 days or 4, and then that will be that. I went to sleep. In the morning I was up before light, which is habit, and I dressed in the cold back room and went out to the barn before anyone else was moving. The sky in the east was just beginning to do something. Not light yet, just a lessening of the dark, the particular kind of not quite dark that comes before the real thing, and the snow had stopped, and the world was clean and buried and quiet in that way it gets after a big snow, like it's listening for something. Like it's waiting to find out what you'll do next. I found Ruth Calloway's horse in the traces where she'd left him, tied to the wagon that had gone into the ditch at the bend I knew. He was cold and unhappy about it, and had eaten down to the last of what he could reach, but he was sound. I got him loose and walked him back to the barn and put him in the empty stall next to my roan and got him fed and watered and checked his feet, which were all right. A stocky bay, probably 12 years old, steady look in his eye, the horse of a practical woman, chosen for soundness over show. Then I did my usual morning work. The horses, the water, a quick check of the fence line closest to the barn where the drifts could pile up against the bottom rail and put pressure on it. The cold was sharp but windless now, the kind of cold that's clean rather than mean. I could see my breath and the breath of the horses and the steam rising off the fresh water in the trough. I stood in the barn door for a moment when I was done and looked at the ranch under the new snow. The fields and the fence lines and the creek running dark through all that white. It looked the same as it always did, but I was looking at it differently. I was looking at it the way you look at something you're thinking might have a use you hadn't considered. When I came back in, Mee was in the kitchen. She had found the coffee and she was standing on the stool I kept by the stove and she was attempting to make it. She'd found the right amount, not too much, not too little, and she had the water going. She looked at me when I came in and said, "I thought you'd want coffee when you got back." I stood there a second. "I'll show you where the good grounds are," I said. "Those are the old ones." She stepped down off the stool without any injured pride, and I showed her the canister on the high shelf where I kept the better coffee, and together we made it right. She watched everything I did with the same cataloging attention she'd turned on me the night before. 8 years old, maybe 9, and she had the eyes of a person who has learned that information is the thing between you and the next bad thing. But it wasn't anxious, the way you see it in some children who have been scared into it. It was more like curiosity that had found its proper channel. She wanted to understand things, and things turning bad had given her more urgent things to understand, so now she understood them urgently. But the wanting to know was hers. "Your mama up," I said. "Lily's still warm," she said. "Mama was up with her most of the night. She's sleeping now." She said it with a certain protective gravity, like I should know this information and know also what it meant, that we were to be quiet about it, that we were to let it be. "Dora's still asleep too." "Let them sleep," I said. Mee and I had coffee. She had hers with a lot of water cut into it and some of the dried apple, which I found and sliced without being asked. And we sat at the table in the early morning light, and I told her about the ranch. The 30 acres, the 2 horses now 3, the creek that ran along the eastern edge, the cellar where the winter food was, the fence she'd need to watch in spring because it was the one thing I hadn't gotten around to before the freeze came. I told her about the roan, his temperament, which was cautious but not spooky, and how he liked to be approached. I told her where the extra wood was, and why the north wall of the barn was a degree colder than the rest, and how I'd been meaning to fix it. She listened. She asked good questions, not trying to seem smart questions, working questions. The kind you ask when you actually need the answers. How deep does the creek freeze? Not all the way through, mostly. There's a spring feeding it from below. Do the horses get out when the fence is down? The roan will, the bay won't. The bay's a homebody. What do you do when the roan gets out? I told her. She filed it. I watched her file it. I thought her father taught her something before he went. Or her mother did. The way she collects information and stays calm with it. That's taught by someone who stays calm with it themselves. Dora came out around 8, still half asleep, and sat next to me at the table without asking and put her head on my arm. Just like that. No preamble, no looking for permission. like it was a thing she'd always done and I was the usual person she did it to. I sat very still. I didn't know what to do with my arm, so I left it where it was. Me looked at her sister and then at me, and something crossed her face. She almost smiled. It wasn't quite a smile. It was the look of someone who has seen this before and knows how it ends. Like she was saying, yes, this is what Dora does and usually it's fine. I found the oats and made porridge, which I did not usually make because there was no point making a proper pot of it for one person. But for four I could do it right, a real pot, properly thick, with time on the stove. I put dried apple in it and the little bit of maple sugar I'd been saving since September because I'd had some notion of using it for something, and then never had anything to use it for. Lily came out at 9, and she was still pale, but the burning-up look was off her. Ruth was behind her, one hand light on the girl's shoulder, guiding her without steering. Ruth looked like she hadn't slept much, not broken down, just used, the way a tool looks at the end of a long job. She looked at the porridge on the stove and at me sitting with her coffee cut with water, and at Dora pressed against my side with her eyes half closed and at me standing at the stove, and she stopped walking for just a moment. Then she said, "Lily, say good morning to Mr. Marsh." Lily looked at me from behind her mother's hand. "Good morning," she said, very small, with the particular formality of a 4-year-old doing a thing they've been told to do. "Good morning, Lily," I said. She considered me for a while with those two large eyes, which were dark, same as her mother's, but had more of the fever still in them, and then went to her sisters and climbed up onto the bench between me and Dora, and me put an arm around her without looking, automatic, the way older siblings do when they've been doing it for years. I poured Ruth a cup of coffee. She sat down and wrapped her hands around it, and I didn't say anything because she was the kind of woman where the silence was not a problem and didn't need to be filled. I watched her without watching her directly, the way you do. She had come through the night, through a wagon and a ditch and a sick child and a stranger's house and a bad floor to sleep on, and she was here at my table on Christmas morning with her shoulders straight and her hands around a hot cup, and that was it. That was all the inventory she needed to take. She wasn't asking what came next, and she wasn't making anything dramatic out of any of it. She was just here, drinking the coffee. I've known a lot of people. More than most men do because of the work. You meet them all as the law, the ones making trouble and the ones running from it and the ones caught in between. And after a while, you think you've got a good taxonomy of what people are. But occasionally, you meet someone who doesn't fit any category you've built, and you have to start a new one. The three girls ate. Lily ate about a third as much as Dora and twice as much as I'd expected, which seemed like a good sign. Me ate the way a child eats when food is not taken for granted, not wolfing it, but deliberate, no waste. Dora ate as if she'd forgotten there was anything interesting in the world, and the porridge was all of it. Ruth ate last, after she'd made sure the girls had enough. After breakfast, Ruth said, "Tell me what I can do." I said nothing. She said Gideon, and the way she said my name, plain, no softness in it but no edge either, just direct, like she had the right to use it, and the right to say what came after stopped me. "Tell me what I can do." I thought about it honestly. The back room needed airing. I'd been sleeping in there, and it needed the window cracked for an hour and the bedding turned. The root cellar needed someone to go down and check that the preserves hadn't shifted after the freeze. There was a spot where a jar had been wobbling on its shelf, and if the shelf had warped any further in the cold, it would come down. The water needed bringing from the creek, which wasn't hard but was a 2-person job in this cold. One to break the ice at the edge, and one to manage the bucket on the steep part of the bank. I told her. She nodded. She went and did them. We moved around each other in the house that day with an ease that I couldn't quite account for. It wasn't familiarity. We were still careful with each other, still keeping the correct distance, still saying sir and ma'am in the places where they fit. But there was something in it that was like having done this before, or like some arrangement had been reached that neither of us had put into words. She didn't ask where things were twice. I didn't have to explain what needed doing more than once. When I was in one part of the house, she was in another, and when I came through a room, she moved without it being a production, and when she needed to get past me, I moved without it being a production either. The second day settled into its shape before I'd noticed it settling. I woke in the back room and lay there for a while listening to the sounds the house was making, which were different from the sounds it usually made, populated differently, warmer somehow even before I'd started the fire, and I tried to decide how I felt about it. Not the situation. I knew how I felt about the situation, or I was beginning to. I tried to decide how I felt about the feeling itself, about wanting something again. About the way the wanting came back in the night and made itself at home like it had every right to, like it hadn't been gone for years. There's a thing that happens when you've made your peace with a life. You arrange yourself to fit it. You stop reaching in certain directions because those directions have closed, and after long enough you forget you were reaching at all. The forgetting is how you manage. It's not dishonest, it's practical, the way any adaptation is practical. You work with what you have. What I wasn't prepared for was how fast the forgetting could undo itself. One night, one midnight knock, 3 girls and a woman who looked at me straight and put her hand on mine, and the whole arrangement, all those years of careful not hoping, came apart as easy as a knot that was never tied right to begin with. I got up and made the fire and started the coffee and stood at the window looking out at the snow, which was still deep and still beautiful in the early light, and I thought, all right, here we are. This is what's happening, I let it be true. Me followed me to the barn in the afternoon and helped me with the horses. She was good with animals, no flinching, no nervous energy, the kind of still presence that horses read correctly and settle to. The roan let her touch his nose on the second try, which the roan does not do with strangers usually. He's a careful animal and he makes you earn it. She looked at me when it happened, not triumphant, just noting it, and I said, "He likes you," and she said, "I think he's still deciding," and she was right, and I told her so, and she filed that too. She asked me if I'd always lived out here. I told her I hadn't, that I'd come here about 7 years back, after the knee, when I couldn't do the work I'd been doing anymore. That before that I'd been the law in Cutter County. And before that I'd done some things I was less proud of when I was younger and hadn't known better or hadn't cared. She thought about this. What did you do that you're not proud of? Nothing, I tell you, I said. She accepted this. Were you ever scared? Plenty of times. She seemed to find this more reassuring than the alternative would have been. We finished with the horses, and I showed her how to check the roan's left rear shoe, which had been wearing a little unevenly, and she crouched down and looked at it with the same careful attention she brought to everything. When she stood back up, she said, "Can I name him?" "He's got a name," I said. She waited. "I call him Roan," I said. She looked at me with the patient expression of a child who has received an answer that doesn't quite clear the bar. "That's not a name," she said. "That's just what he looks like." I had no reasonable argument against this. "What would you call him?" I said. She thought about it seriously, which I appreciated. Not pulling something out of the air, actually thinking about it, looking at the horse while she thought, like the name should come from him rather than from her. The roan stood in his stall and looked back at her with those cautious eyes. "Porter," she said. I considered it. "Why Porter?" "He looks like he'd carry things carefully," she said. I thought about it. That was exactly right. He was a careful horse. He moved with a kind of deliberateness, placed his feet like he was thinking about it. Porter was right. I didn't say so right away because I didn't want her to think it was that easy to name another man's horse, but it was right and I knew it. "Porter," I said. She smiled. Not the controlled almost smile from earlier, a real one, quick and bright and then gone like she'd caught herself. "Don't tell Dora it was that easy," I said. She'll want to name the bay. What's the bay's name? Bay, I said. Me looked at me with an expression of such controlled patience that I had to look at the stall wall to keep from laughing. We came back in from the barn, and the late light was going orange across the snow, and I stood for a moment in the doorway between the barn and the yard and watched it. The shadows of the fence posts going long and blue across the white, the smoke from the chimney going up straight in the still air, the warm amber light in the kitchen window. I had looked at that window from that doorway hundreds of times. It had never looked like anything except the window. That afternoon it looked like something worth walking toward. I walked toward it. The third day the sun came out and the snow went blinding, and I walked the fence line in the afternoon while the girls were inside with their mother, and I tried to think clearly about what I'd said the night before. I don't often say things I regret. I'm a careful man by nature and by training, and the combination has kept me from most of the worst things a person can do with words. But what I'd said to Ruth Calloway at the table I couldn't take back, and the question I was turning over on the fence line wasn't whether I'd meant it. I'd meant it. The question was whether a man of 61 had any business meaning it. Whether I was being honest or whether I was being desperate, and whether there was a real difference between those two things at my age, and at what point wanting something badly enough looks the same from the outside as being foolish enough to believe you can have it. I fixed 2 places in the fence where the wire had gone slack, which took longer than it should have because the cold made the pliers stiff in my hand. I stood at the far northeast corner where the creek bent and looked back at the house. From there, it was just a shape against the snow, dark wood, and a chimney, and the yellow in the window that meant someone was in the kitchen. Small and settled and particular, the way a thing looks when it belongs to the land around it. Clara and I had talked once. I don't know why I remembered it walking back about what it would be like to get old. Not old sick or old dying, just old ordinary. The years getting behind you more than ahead, the body starting to say things you didn't ask it to say. She'd said she thought it would be easier with someone. Not easier in a sentimental way, easier the way a load is easier when there are 2 people carrying it. The weight doesn't change. You just distribute it differently. I'd thought about that conversation a lot over the 11 years since she died. I thought about it differently now. Dora had found the deck of cards on the table when I came back in and set herself up some game that I didn't recognize. When I came in from the barn, she looked up and said, "Do you play?" And I said I did, and she said, "I'll teach you this one," and I sat down and she taught me, and it was not actually a real game. The rules changed twice during the first hand, and the method for scoring was one that she appeared to invent in the moment she needed it, but I played it straight and let it be what it was, and she beat me fair and square by her rules and seemed satisfied with the result. Lily sat close to her mother all afternoon, not speaking much, watching me from a distance that decreased over the course of the day in increments so small I almost didn't notice them. By supper time, she had come close enough to look at my hands when I was cutting the salt pork for the pot, and she studied them for a while and then said, "You have a big scar." "I do," I said. "How?" "A disagreement," I said, "with a piece of wire." She thought about this carefully. "Did you win?" "Not really," I said. She seemed to find this acceptable and went back to her mother. Ruth caught my eye over Lily's head, and this time she did smile, just for a second, and it changed her whole face in a way I don't have the right words for. It wasn't a beautiful smile in the way that word is usually used. It was realer than that. It was the smile of a person who has not smiled in a while and is genuinely surprised that they still can, and who is maybe a little uncertain what to do with that information. I looked away before I made anything of it. Supper was better than anything I'd made for myself in a long while. Ruth added things. I don't know how she found them. Dried sage in the back of a shelf I hadn't touched since October. A small bunch of something that had been hanging in the cellar that I'd put there in summer and half forgotten. The salt pork stew was different from what it usually was. Dora said it was the best thing she'd ever eaten, which I suspect was not precisely true, but which I appreciated. Me ate 2 bowls and said nothing, but looked satisfied in the way of a person who's had enough. Lily ate half a bowl and fell asleep sitting up, and Ruth lifted her carefully and carried her to bed. And there was something in the way she did it, the ease of it, the particular way she adjusted the child's weight before she stood, that told you how many times she'd done exactly this. Me and Dora helped me clear up without being asked. Me washed and Dora dried and I put away, and it was the most efficient arrangement I'd had in that kitchen in years. Then me said goodnight and went to check on her sisters, and Dora sat back down at the table and found the cards again, and I found myself sitting across from her while she dealt out another indeterminate game, and the house around me felt different from any house I'd been in a long time. The most human it had been in 11 years. That was the thought. I let it sit. Ruth came back and Dora scooped up her cards and yawned, and took herself off to bed with a businesslike good night that made Ruth exhale through her nose in what was almost a laugh. That involuntary sound you make when something is precisely what you expect from a person you know well. We sat at the table again. The fire good, the wind outside softer tonight, the snow settled and glittering under the moon that had come out for the first time in 2 days. The room was warm. The house was still. She said she's going to ask you tomorrow if she can name the roan. I know, I said. Say yes, she said. I was planning to. She looked at her hands on the table. Her hands were not soft. They were the hands of a woman who has worked and worked for real. I looked at them for a moment and then I looked at the table. You don't have to keep the sister's house, I said. I don't know where that came from. Or I do, but I hadn't planned to say it. I said it because it was there and it was true, and I'd gotten to the age where I preferred true things to careful ones, even when the careful ones were safer and the true ones could cost you. She looked up. I know, I said. I know that's not. I know you have somewhere to go and people who are waiting for you, and I know we don't know each other past a day and a night. I know all of that. I looked at the table. I'm not saying it as an argument or as any kind of a proposition. I'm just saying I've got 30 acres that need more than one person. I've got a barn that's too quiet and a house that's had the wrong number of people in it for a long time. I stopped. I've been practicing being finished for a while now, and I don't think I want to practice it anymore. She was quiet. The fire, the wind softer, the moon on the snow outside. I'm not easy, she said. She said it without apology, just as information. I'm not easy either, I said. My girls come first. They have to come first every time before anything else. Of course they do. Me is going to argue with you, she said. About everything. It's how she learns. She argues until she understands something and then she stops arguing and starts doing. But you'll have to go through the arguing. I noticed. Dora will make up rules and expect you to follow them. She won't always explain what they are in advance. I noticed that too. Lily, she stopped. Her face did something for a second that she got control of quickly, the way a person presses a hand over something that wants to bleed. Lily gets sick. She gets sick and I don't always know how bad it's going to be, and sometimes I won't be good company when she's sick because I'll be somewhere else in my head. That's just the truth of it. I know, I said, and then, I was the law for 15 years. I've sat with sick people and with the people who love them. I know how to be in that room and be useful and stay out of the way at the same time. I can do that. She looked at me for a long time. The way she'd looked at me at the door when I first opened it, that measuring look, the one that goes all the way down and doesn't stop at the surface. I held it. I didn't look away and I didn't dress it up. Then she said quietly, "Why are you doing this?" And I said, "Because you knocked at midnight on Christmas Eve with 3 girls in the snow and you didn't flinch when you saw the gun. And because me made coffee this morning without being asked. And because Dora taught me a game with rules she made up and beat me fair by them. And because Lily asked me if I won the argument with the wire, I looked at her. That's enough for me. That's more than enough. She looked at me a while longer. Then she looked at the table. Then she put her hand on mine, just set it there, flat, warm, real, with no ceremony to it, just the weight of it on the back of my hand, and she left it there. I looked at her hand on mine. I am not going to tell you I wasn't scared. I was, not of her, not of the girls. Scared of the hoping is what it was. Scared of the thing I'd put down carefully and thought was gone for good coming back. Because when it comes back it can leave again, and that second leaving is the part that costs you most. I was 61 years old and I had been through enough to know that. The coming back is also the risk. But her hand was warm and she had steady eyes, and she'd come back from worse than this, and so had I. And we were both still here at this table on Christmas night in a room that smelled like wood smoke and salt pork and 3 sleeping girls. And we were both still trying. And there was something in that, the fact of it, the plain, simple fact of 2 used-up people still trying, that was larger than the fear. I turned my hand over under hers, and I held it. She didn't pull away. Outside, the snow on the ground caught the moonlight and threw it back up, so the whole world had a faint glow to it, sourceless, like the light was coming from inside the snow rather than from above it. Inside, the fire settled. The house breathed around us, the small sounds of sleeping children in the next room, steady, even the sound of people who have found a safe place and let themselves go all the way down into sleep. I held her hand and we didn't say anything else for a while, and that was all right. And after a while that was the whole world, the table, the fire, the moonlit snow, the sleeping girls, and her hand steady in mine. And I thought about the candle I'd lit that night, that one last stub of tallow. Save it for what? I'd thought it was a reasonable question. I'd thought there was no reasonable answer. I'd been wrong. Wrong in the way that a man can be wrong for 11 years and not know it because nothing has come along to correct him. And then something does at midnight in the snow with 3 cold girls and a hand that doesn't flinch. A man who's been practicing being finished had just been corrected. And I held her hand in mine at the table in the firelight, and the fire kept burning, and the snow kept its cold light outside, and I was not finished at all.